Some 200 years ago, philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident." Which begs the question, what truths of tomorrow are we currently resisting as blind ignorance today? My guest believes that a healthy skepticism around vaccination is one such truth. With a bachelor's degree in biochemical sciences from Harvard University and an MD from New York University, Dr. Richard Moskowitz is also the author of 5 books and is now in his 4th decade as a practicing homeopathist in nearby Watertown. Welcome to Wide Angle, Dr. Moskowitz.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Maybe a place to start is back, maybe 4 decades ago when you started this work. One of the things that I've most appreciated about your work relative to vaccination is your honesty, what I perceive as your honesty and transparency around the issue. You write something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have a lot of answers when it comes to vaccines. What I have are troubling questions, and I'm a bit perplexed why my fellow physicians don't have the same curiosities around these issues. What was it about vaccinations 4 decades ago that engaged your curiosity and imagination and concern?
Well, I must admit I have to do this a little retrospectively because at the time I didn't know. I just had this gut feeling, don't do this. Something told me that there's something wrong with this.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what it was, but I obeyed it. And then we moved to Boston, my wife and I, and I took a sabbatical year and I started thinking about it seriously. That was 1982. And I started reading and studying as much as I could. And I began to have a concept of what my problem was. And it's still my problem, except now I can see, I can give words to it better.
Right.
So let's think about the measles. That's a very good example because it's a strong infectious disease and it has a high fever and then you get over it in a week and I'm looking at that process, what's involved in that. That's a concerted outpouring of the entire immune system, the result of which is that the measles virus is expelled from the blood. All of these mechanisms are activated. Right. And as a result of that, what I would call natural immunity, which is lifelong, it's absolute, it's qualitative immunity. That is to say, first of all, it's specific. I will never again get the measles, no matter how many times I'm re-exposed to it. That's specific immunity. But what we often don't think about is there's also an important non-specific immunity. Namely, I have primed the immune system to respond in this acute, vigorous manner. And so it's ready to go for whatever is going to come down the pike in the future. So it's like a graduation ceremony for my immune system. And indeed, I credit the good health that I presently enjoy in no small measure to the fact that I was able to come down with and recover from illnesses of that kind.
Right. You've been, I think, courageous enough to ask those questions, yeah? Whereas I think Western medicine more generally has a standard belief that disease is bad, and that anything that, any technologies, any medicines that we can use to keep disease at bay is therefore ipso facto good. You know, your belief is markedly different. Disease has an important role to play in our overall health. Overall health of the individual.
Especially acute diseases.
Okay. Yeah, well, you want to take that up, well, and as well as the overall health of our communities.
Yes, yeah? It's that double-barreled immunity that I described is a huge benefit, not only for the individual, but for the community and for the human race as a whole. Right. I mean, as an example, again with measles, you know, as my pro-vaccine colleagues never tire of emphasizing, measles used to be a killer disease. That is, in a virgin population exposed to it for the first time, like when Cortez brought it over to Mexico, for example, it killed 20% of the people who were exposed to it. In no small measure, that was a significant part of Cortez's triumph.
However, in those who've been exposed to it over years, over generations, it's a very different scene, which was sort of what...
It took a few hundred years, but by the time I got the measles when I was 6 years old, it had become a normal routine disease of childhood. It cost me a week in bed with my mother could afford to stay home in those days and nurse me through it. She was a housewife, you know, and she put me under a tent and, you know, with a vaporizer and I, you know, I had a grand time. But I came out of that with my immune system ready to go. And not only are we depriving our children of that experience, because people might say, well, okay, there's that on that side, but you can still come down with other things. But my sense is, my contention is, my experience indicates that that's not quite what happens, that in fact, we're chronically reprogramming the immune system in such a way that the children are less likely to do that.
And that's the, well, and that's the non-specific piece of going through a disease naturally, is that it increases the vigor of the immune system to deal with anything that it encounters.
Any bacterium, any virus, even any allergen for that matter.
It's interesting because certainly one of the major arguments that pediatricians, that the public health community more widely will offer if any parent has even questions about vaccination, is that it comes down to your responsibility to the wider community to have your child vaccinated, and that's for the good of the communities. But what you're suggesting is that the good of the community is served by actually having our children in good health, ideally, dealing with these diseases and coming out of them more than likely stronger.
Not only that. The argument, because you could say that and still grant the argument that the unvaccinated kids are somehow a danger to the other children, to the vaccinated kids. But think about that argument for a moment, because what that means is if the unvaccinated kids are capable of infecting the vaccinated kids, that's equivalent to saying the vaccine isn't any damn good. It doesn't work. So, you know, and it turns out that the argument is false, because that has always been invoked, you know, that the vaccinated kids are at risk from the unvaccinated, and so there's a lot of social pressure on mothers and fathers to vaccinate their kids from their neighbors. And the truth is quite the opposite, that a lot of the epidemics that are still happening, like with whooping cough, for example, which has been making a tremendous resurgence lately, it has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's the vaccinated people that are spreading it, not the unvaccinated.
Well, and that maybe sort of leads right into the next question that I had for you, and that is that there's nearly universal agreement that many of the epidemic diseases have declined dramatically in both frequency as well as severity since vaccines were introduced. You are not convinced by that. What evidence leads you to question what is largely a widely accepted belief and conclusion?
Well, first of all, there is excellent evidence that is widely shared in the medical profession itself that those diseases, most of those diseases, were already in rampant decline long before the vaccines were made available. For example, The first vaccine that was approved for mass use was the whooping cough, and the
Also
tetanus.
called pertussis vaccine use.
And this was back in the 40s during the war, and a noted epidemiologist of the time warned that the decline in the disease has been so dramatic that it's going to be impossible to demonstrate the effectiveness of the vaccine.
Pediatricians, family docs will accept that, well, yeah, if you had a vaccine, you might get some tenderness, some swelling at the injection site. You might get a fever. But generally, not much beyond that in terms of possible reactions to vaccination. Your experience in your practice of 30 years now suggests that adverse events can certainly express themselves in ways far beyond those very limited means. And speaking to autoimmune illness is certainly a piece of that. Can you paint a little bit of that picture?
Well, I'll give you the real down and dirty basic thing that is common enough to be the rule rather than the exception. The vaccines, no matter which ones they are, will have a tendency to make worse what's already there. So, for example, I'm treating a kid for ear infections. You know, they've had 10 ear infections by the time they're 15 months old. You know, and so we're doing some work with natural medicine and stuff, and they're doing great, and the pediatrician is thrilled, and the parents are delighted, and everything's going along. And then it's time for booster X, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be any vaccine. And within 2 weeks, we're right back to square one. And I see this over and over again, whether it's asthma, whether it's eczema, whether it's ADD, whether it's autism, whatever it is. The vaccines have a tendency to make worse what's already there. That's
present in the individual.
Yeah, that's the sort of substratum, and it falls through the cracks because the kid already has it. You know. So you can't say the vaccine caused it. And there are some other reasons why it's invisible. Another one that's very important is that it doesn't necessarily appear right away. It takes maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months. And so people say, it's a coincidence, you know, had nothing to do with it. But this has to do with our criteria, you see.
Well, and I think it's relatively standard in clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies to look over a period of days as opposed to months and years.
Exactly. So very rare for those to be accepted after, say, 7 days. That would be the absolute maximum for most things.
Let's take a break there, if we can, Doctor. Please join us on the other side of this public service announcement.
If you live in one of the 22 communities that appear on your screen now, you likely belong to the Mystic River Watershed. This vital resource is a natural living system that we all share. Since 1972, the Mystic River Watershed Association has successfully fought to protect and restore this treasure. Now I'm asking you to join that effort. Please go to mysticriver.org to become a member and to find out how you can help today.
Welcome back to Wide Angle. I'm Peter Bermudez speaking with Dr. Richard Moskowitz about vaccinations. Welcome back to the second half. Let's pick up something that I found in the local newspaper last week. It has to do with flu vaccines.
Yes.
Typically a vaccine targeted more toward the elderly.
Well, that's how it started.
And more recently, although I gather from you, it's not so recent, something that's given to school children.
To everybody.
Routinely. So here's the piece.
Even pregnant women.
Even pregnant women. Here's the piece that ran in the Arlington Advocate last week. Flu vaccines offered. Flu vaccination clinics have been scheduled at each of the Arlington Public Schools so that students may get their vaccination during school hours. Your thoughts on maybe the flu vaccine generally, on on giving it to the elderly, giving it to school children?
The flu vaccine is really in a class by itself because it's been known right from the beginning that it mostly doesn't work, and indeed it can't work because for two big reasons. First of all, the influenza vaccine is notoriously mutable. Even within the space of a single outbreak or from week to week, that virus is changing all the time, so that the chances that you're going to hit it on the nose with the particular vaccine version that you're coming up with is very small. Secondly, even if you did, even if by some miracle you were able to target exactly that strain of the influenza virus and hit it with the vaccine, a huge percentage of the flu-like illnesses that are running around the population, especially during the winter, are not influenza viruses at all. So the chances that you're going to be able to have an impact on the total burden of flu-like illnesses in the population is virtually nil. In the 90s, it got recycled because that was the Clinton era. That was the heyday of vaccination by using another criterion, namely an economic criterion, that people, these now two-paycheck families, could no longer afford to stay home and nurse their kids through a febrile illness. And so the social cost was deemed to be so excessive that this vaccine came into play.
Which I think was the same argument for the chickenpox
The
vaccine when it
chickenpox,
came
the
along.
rotavirus, and many of the vaccines to follow. So,
which certainly seems like an opportunity for parents to say, well, I actually can stay home and help nurse my child through this illness.
Absolutely.
But in the case of flu, that's a recommended vaccine. In the case of chickenpox now, it's a mandated vaccine, and you parents do not have the freedom or the liberty to choose and make selections amongst vaccines and what they feel is in the best interest of their children or not.
Well, in Massachusetts, they almost do. They almost can pick and choose, even though the law doesn't permit that. The law says that you can be exempted from the requirement to vaccinate if you can show a strong religious conviction that is against that. But by religious, they mean that it's across the board, that you're a kook like me, that you don't, you don't believe in vaccines at all. It doesn't allow you to make an intelligent medical decision for your children.
Foreign substances, live viruses, proteins,
foreign proteins, foreign cells, monkey kidney cells, things like that, calf serum, all sorts of things, plus adjuvants.
And hence your curiosity, I would imagine, as a physician back at the beginning of your practice, what are these things doing in our bodies?
Exactly. How do vaccines act inside the human body? And my clinical experience that I've just indicated about how they make worse what's already there, for example, plus the plethora of autoimmune diseases that have been documented to be traced to vaccines, plus all of the experimental work that shows that they may not be manifest right away, leads me to believe that autoimmunity is the basic mechanism for how vaccines act, both for good and for ill, for how they do whatever it is that they do, how they accomplish the partial artificial immunity that they accomplish, and also how they produce the woeful side effects that I've just indicated. So,
On that note.
I can't yet prove that, but that's my conviction.
Yeah.
And I believe that it will be proven quite conclusively soon.
Yeah. Do you think my sense is that in terms of the research being done around vaccination, it's more research funded by pharmaceutical companies that are looking to add to the palette of vaccines that are available.
Yes, that's right.
As opposed to what is it these vaccines are actually doing once inside the body. So you feel that there's significant research being done that could actually answer those sorts of questions?
There is, but it's difficult because, as you indicated, the big pharma, the pharmaceutical industry, has most of the money.
Mm-hmm.
The academic medical centers are losing money. The hospitals are losing money. So very few institutions have the wherewithal, the resources to mount a full-scale clinical trial on their own.
Sure. You write, and I'm thinking now in terms of, okay, given this picture, where do we go from here? If viewers are still with us and hopeful that the story ends well, let's see what we can do, perhaps. You write that you do not favor either abolition of or uncritical acceptance either of specific vaccines or of the general strategy of using them to prevent diseases. So I'm going to ask, what approach do you favor in terms of how to use or not use vaccines?
Well, basically what I favor is, first of all, decoupling the agencies that regulate vaccines from the vaccine industry so that we have independent, well-funded studies funded by the government, by the taxpayers, to determine how vaccines really act, to determine what the effect of the vaccination process is, and to evaluate specific vaccines as they come up. And even to reevaluate the ones that we already have. That's number one. Because there's really a lot of research that maybe it was done by the drug companies, but they're keeping it secret. It's allowed to be a trade secret, essentially. We don't know what the real mechanism is by which a vaccine remains inside the body for a long, long period of time, such that the body continues to make antibodies against it. We need to know that. Until that research is done, I personally don't see any huge need for any of them at this point, frankly. But I recognize that it's a complex situation. And I also recognize that there are a lot of people out there who believe that vaccines are the greatest thing since sliced bread. So my proposal is very simple. Just let them be optional. Let parents have the authority that they naturally enjoy to make the decisions for their own children, which vaccines are appropriate and which ones that are not appropriate. I think under the circumstances, they are the best ones to make that decision.
Let's say that there are parents out there who are concerned about the question of vaccination. They regard it as a question as opposed to a foregone conclusion, first of all. And they would like to maybe find a doctor who they feel they could have a conversation with. More than likely, they've heard that parents who were questioning of vaccination have in some cases been booted out of practices.
Absolutely.
So they're interested in having an open conversation with somebody who hopefully can give them information.
Absolutely.
How would they go about trying to find that person?
There are a growing number of doctors who will, even though they may disagree with you, they may try to argue with you or persuade you to agree to vaccinate your kid up to the hilt, but they won't put you down if you don't. They won't kick you out. They won't disrespect you. And those are the ones that you should seek out, because you shouldn't expect at this stage of the game that doctors are going to question vaccines, or because most of them don't.
Right.
Very few of them do, although I must say the number is growing. It's certainly way bigger than it was when I got started on this. There are now, you know, some hundreds of doctors in the United States that are questioning various aspects of the vaccination process,
Right.
And saying many of the same things that I've been saying.
Right.
But the chances that any given individual is going to find one of them nearby is not that likely.
Right. So is it effectively then maybe word of mouth, talking to other parents?
Yes.
Maybe conducting interviews with doctors and seeing what they're
looking, and also looking online
Okay.
for information, because that's where you'll find stuff.
Okay.
That's what parents are doing. There's a wonderful website called stopmandatoryvaccination.com, which has been collecting stories of parents whose children have been injured by vaccines because nobody else will print them.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds and thousands of them.
Wow.
I've actually quoted some of them. They're really, they speak for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are groups like that around.
Okay. And maybe you've predicted my next question, which can certainly be other resources.
Yes.
If hopefully people can find doctors, but websites, organizations, books.
The National Vaccine Information Center in Washington is a terrific resource. They have been, the woman who founded that, her child was brain damaged by the DPT vaccine back in the 1980s. And she was the one who almost single-handedly, with the help of a colleague whose child was also injured, founded a parents advocacy group, which was called, at that time, it was called DPT, Dissatisfied Parents Together. And it soon morphed into the National Vaccine Information Center. And they put out a newsletter which is very informative. They have chapters all over the country. They sponsor conferences every year, and that woman is still at it.
Yeah. Another place that should be added to a list of resources around this is your website as well. Yes, there are a number of articles there.
Yeah, there are articles that I've written in the past.
Okay.
Yes.
And www.drrmosk.
Doctor written out, D-O-C-T-O-R, rmosk.com.
M-O-S-K?
Yes.
.com. Well, Dr. Moskowitz, I can't thank you enough for joining me today.
It was a pleasure.
As well as for having, well, the courage and the bravery to ask those questions and go with your gut 40 years ago, and continue through the next 4 decades asking the questions again and again, trying to encourage people to engage with them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure being here.
Yeah. We Americans have a reputation for being an irreverent lot, with little respect for sacred cows. If challenged by said cows, we tend to ask questions, dig beneath the surface, and challenge authority, even if, at the risk of mixing metaphors, it might ruffle some feathers. And vaccination seems a perfect candidate for such treatment. Yet as described by my guest today, this issue illustrates the exception to that rule, with many of us reflexively following public health mandates, little considering what it is that vaccines might be doing to us and our children, in addition to the jobs for which we created them. Perhaps only further reflection, along with some significant research conducted after an informed and empowered public has demanded it, will reveal a deeper truth. For Dr. Richard Moskowitz, I'm Peter Bermudez. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.